Hi, Katya. Can you hear me?
Hello, Joanna. How are you?
I'm
Can,
good.
can you hear me?
Yes, it's clear.
Okay.
Can you check if Rania and Galva also got their link? Um,
Yes, I'll ask them.
thank
Yes,
you.
just a second.
Hi, Rania. Can you hear me clearly?
Hi, Joanna. Yes, I can hear you. I
Uh,
just received the registration approval, so I got in.
yes, great. So we're just waiting for Galwa from your team, right?
Yes,
Okay. Do you want me to assign the three of you already, or should we wait for Galwa?
yes, it's better. Maybe she's running a bit late, so it's better if we are assigned, at least me, because I'm doing the same combination as her English, so that I can start if
Okay.
anything happens.
Sure, I will assign everyone now.
So I'm in English and Arabic.
Okay.
Joanna,
Yes.
Ralois is unable to get the registration confirmation.
I also sent her the meeting link via email. So if she can check her email address.
Okay, I'll tell her to do so. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Rene. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good morning.
Good morning. So I'll assign you already as
Thank
interpreter.
you.
All right, thank you.
yung video doon. Oo, video sa may Maraculan. Parang doon yung ano na yun. Doon susunduin yung babae na sa
For the interpreters, I hope you can hear me. Can we try each channel? So I'll go through the channel French, Arabic, Spanish, and then afterwards we can check the relay of English, Spanish. Okay, so hi everyone. I'm in the Arabic channel. Can you hear me?
I'm on the Arabic channel, Joanna. It's Rania.
All right. Thank you. It's clear. Others are also here. Katya and Marianne, are you here in the Arabic channel? Okay.
Yes, I can hear. Sorry, I was on mute. I didn't pay attention. I can hear everything and everything is well.
All right. Thank you. Hi, Katya. Are you? I'm in the French channel. Can you hear me? Is it clear?
Oui, cabine française de
Joanna.
Montréal. Tout est clair.
Can you hear me? I'm on the French channel.
Yes, it's clear.
You can hear me clear. Okay, and can I switch to the Arabic channel, please?
Yes.
Okay, I'm on the Arabic channel now. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I know that Ghalwa is having problems. I mean, she couldn't register because I think the link was for panelists or regular participants. I don't know, there's a problem with her registration.
Can you ask her, because just a while ago I saw to Joanna because I gave her my link. So if you can ask her to join again and then ask her to rename so I can assign her as interpreter.
Okay, I'll tell her that. Okay, thank you, Joanna. Thank you.
Okay, for the what's this? For the I will be doing the relay. Is it okay if we move to the English channel so we can check if Rene can hear you and then vice versa?
I'm on the English channel now, trying the relay, testing the relay. Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
I can hear you. Thank you. Rene. Can you hear them in the English channel, Rene?
So again, I'm on the English channel. Rene, can you hear me for the relay? So this, perfect.
Hello, good morning.
Hi, morning, Joanna. Hi, morning, William, and everyone else.
Hi, good morning, Alana. May I know is this was the second? It's Elena.
Hi, Helena, posing as Joanna. Hi. Hi, Helena. All good?
Nana, you're on mute. All good as well. How are you, William?
All good, all good. Just winding down a training that we are doing at the moment here in Manila. Also just got back from a mission visit, so.
Oh, wonderful. Nice and busy.
Yeah, it's been really busy 2 weeks. I just got back from nobody's on the call yet, from Saudi Arabia, actually.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
We took an 8-member delegation there upon the invitation of the government. So it's quite a bigger achievement as well.
Yeah, it's amazing recognition. How did it go?
Went very well. I've got to now see how we break it down to see how we move forward on that kind of thing. But it was a good meeting, very good meeting.
That's fantastic. Really neat.
And it's raining here. It's rainy season in the Philippines, so.
It's a hay fever season in Europe.
And you're just coming out of Independence Day celebrations, right, Helena? But y'all had an issue
Yeah.
there in Chicago.
Exactly. Very close to Chicago in the suburbs. Yeah. You
Wow.
know, sadly, it has become part of living in the United States. Sadly.
Which is, I had to try. The suspect is a 22-year-old. Yeah?
Who lived in the neighborhood. You know, there's so many mental health issues that are not being addressed. It's very concerning.
Sorry, I'll accept everyone now.
Okay. Let me just. Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Fernando.
Good evening.
Good morning, William. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Yeah, good to see you as well. We just give it a couple more minutes, 2 minutes to 9, just before we start.
Hi, William. How are you? This is Anisar.
Oh, Anisar, great. Good to see that you could join.
Good evening, William.
Hi, Madhavan. Glad to see you're recovering.
Yeah, already.
All right, I can see everybody's here among our discussion starters. So let us begin. Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It looks like it's been a long time since we've had a webinar, but life's picked up for many of us now that the world is coming back on track to some degree. And it's good to be doing this again. As we in the People's Migration Challenge deliberated on a time as well, we thought it would be good before to do this while ideas are still there, some reflections are still percolating. It would be a nice time for us to look back and look forward at the same time, and to catch people before everybody goes off for a summer vacation kind of thing. And so thank you very much for those who have made it today. Thank you to our resource persons as well. I know this is not an easy calendar to juggle these days, but you have made it. So thank you very much. Let me begin by saying the co-organizers of this People's Migration Challenge. Thank you to the co-organizers who have put in a lot of time and energy and resources into making this happen. Let me call the co-organizers: MFA, Migrant Forum in Asia; CCRM, the Cross Regional Center for Migration and Refugees; the Action Committee; the Global Research Forum on Development, Diaspora and Transnationalism; PICUM, which works on undocumented migrant workers; Alianza Americas; CMDP, the platform on displacement, on disaster and climate change; SATUC, the trade union, the regional configuration in South Asia; and BWI, 9 co-organizers that have come together for a very long time now. And just to give some statistics of this, from March 2020, this process had started in March 2020. And from March 2020 till date, we have had 60 sessions, 60 webinar sessions, just on the socialization and the implementation of the Global Compact. 60 sessions just on this, which has been a fantastic journey that many of us have gone through. When we were looking at the numbers in these 60 sessions, we are counting at the moment 15,000 plus people who have followed these 60 sessions. So it's amazing how the Global Compact has attracted so much attention, so much eagerness on the ground to see how this comprehensive framework is going to be made real in the lives of migrants and their communities. And so this has been a fantastic journey and will continue. Other versions of the PMC will continue to follow as well. But for today, we are looking at the IMRF and what it meant for many of us who were preparing for it, many of us who engaged in it, and many of us who now want to see what is it going forward. And for that, we have 4 very good people who are very in tune with the pulse of the IMRF. So it's fantastic to be able to have the panel today to start this discussion off. We have with us Fernando de la Mora, and Fernando is the coordinator for economic, social, human rights, and humanitarian affairs at the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations, where he leads the work team of the 2nd Committee and 3rd Committees of the General Assembly. But what is important is this man was key in the facilitation team in the GCM when it was being negotiated, in that whole comprehensive framework, a key role played by within the facilitation team, and not only the GCM, even before that on many instances in the UN high-level dialogue series kind of thing as well. So a veteran in negotiating migration discourse at the international level, and it's really great to have Fernando with us today. We have Helena Olea Rodriguez, who currently serves as the Associate Director for Programs at Alianza Americas. She's an international human rights lawyer with advocacy and litigation experience before intergovernmental bodies and government agencies. She's authorized as an attorney to practice law in Colombia and has over 12 years of teaching and research as well on human rights, migration, refugees, and gender. And Helena has played a key role, not only in the PMC ever since it started, but within global civil society as well, as one of the leaders, one of the thinkers, one of the people on the ground who speaks at a global level in a very informed way. And it's good to have her today with us on the panel, as she has been part of this whole preparatory process of civil society in its self-organizing around PMC and looking at the preparations for the IMRF. We have Jonathan Prentice, who has worked in various positions at the United Nations. So a stalwart, a veteran of the UN system. And when he joined in 1994, his positions and postings include in Baghdad, Delhi, Geneva, Jakarta, New York, and Phnom Penh. Obviously, very much of that United Nations ground experience is part of the portfolio he carries. He worked from 2010 to 16 with the International Crisis Group as Director of Policy and overseeing the London office. Most importantly, since 2017 and 18, he was Chief of the Office of the Secretary General Special Representative for International Migration. And since 2019, has been largely responsible for setting up and heading the Secretariat of the United Nations Network on Migration, which plays, again, a very key role in looking at the implementation of the GCM. And finally, last but not least, we have Eleanor Wang, our activist from the youth, who is the core global focal point for the Migration, Youth and Children platform, leading youth participation, migration, representation and advocacy at the UN level, a sector that is becoming more and more important, that I see as feeling more and more frustrated with the world as it is moving. And it is something for us to look at in terms, not only on migration, on so many issues of where we are currently and how these issues intermix with migration, and for the youth as what is happening now and what is the future that they will have to inherit, kind of thing. And Eleanor is involved in a lot of the making of leading the thinking on what should be or what could be a better future. She was formerly the Asia Pacific focal point, leading youth engagement, and she was also responsible for co-organizing roundtables with UNICEF and UNESCO at the 3rd Migration Youth Forum. She holds a BA in Liberal Arts from King's College London and an MSc in Sociology from the University of Edinburgh. She is from our region, and I'm proud of that. She's Singaporean migrant based in Europe, and was born in KL, Malaysia. So that's it. These are the 4 resource people. We did invite the 2 co-facilitators. We did send out an invitation to Bangladesh and the co-facilitator, but both could not make it because of scheduling reasons. But we didn't want to postpone this, so we went ahead with it. So thank you very much for everybody who has joined. Thank you very much for the resource people who are here to start off. So let's kick this off. Fernando, I'll start with you, if that's okay. I'm starting with you because in certain sense, I feel you must be feeling like a parent about this IMRF kind of thing. You've seen years of negotiating at the high level dialogue on coming up with something at the global level. Then you play a key role in bringing to birth the GCM kind of thing in your role as co-facilitator kind of thing. And I'm sure you were on pins and needles with excitement looking at 1 year of the GCM and how is all this going to materialize. So a very parent kind of feeling in this. And as you look back today then at the IMRF and how it, what it was able to accomplish. What are your initial thoughts? Where are you at this initial reflection on how it all went in terms of expectation, in terms of delivery, and in terms of hopes for the future? But let me start with the first part in terms of expectation. Where are you on this and how do you feel about it?
Well, thanks very much, William, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. It's great to see many familiar faces. If I feel like a parent, then really everyone on this call has joint custody of the child because it's really been a collective effort. And the IMRF is strategically important, and we were all looking forward to it because beyond being an occasion to review the GCM, this is what my country has been advocating for decades, which is a place dedicated at the United Nations on the official agenda to discuss migration in all of its aspects and in a multi-stakeholder way. The aim is for the IMRF to really be the center of gravity for discussions surrounding migration. And in many ways, I think it's fair to say that the IMRF exceeded expectations in that it did not paint a rosy picture where there is no rosy picture to be portrayed. It really highlighted some of the very real challenges that have been exacerbated in the field of migration by the pandemic, while at the same time recognizing those areas where progress was made. I think that multilateralism needed a win. The UN is not in the best position coming out of the response to COVID-19, considering the armed conflict in Ukraine, and the least likely of places in the current political environment to have a strong forward-looking consensus document with new commitments to accelerate the implementation of an instrument. The least likely place was migration, and yet we were able to adopt that ministerial declaration and have what I think was a very successful IMRF. And it's an IMRF that cannot be understood without the participation of civil society. William, you mentioned 60 sessions with 15,000 people that came through, looking at all of the representatives from civil society from all of the different parts of the world that brought forward, again, the data, the evidence, the best practices, the advocacy, and that engaged directly with the negotiating delegations and with the co-facilitators was in no small part one of the reasons why we were able to have this success. And it was very, I think, fulfilling to see the whole of government and whole of society approach coming together. And it's timely that it's called the People's Migration Challenge, because we shouldn't forget that the GCM is people-centered, and yet it's also human rights-based. These are two different concepts, and we were able to reflect both in the declaration. So I think that now we have a lot of challenges going forward because this was only the first IMRF, and we've now committed to acceleration. So we're going to be very dependent on the network, certainly for guidance and for having more robust outcomes, but never forgetting that at the center of our efforts should be the migrants themselves. I'll stop there, William.
Thanks, Philando. And key words, of course, from your conversation already, that the IMRF becomes the center of gravity kind of for the GCM, that multilateralism was a win for multilateralism, and that states are now committed to an acceleration of this implementation. All very good kind of perspective, even as we dwell on this, because as I moved to Jonathan to put a follow-up question kind of thing on this, because it was no easy task for sure. The pandemic cut short a lot of the plans of what could have been, what would have, I imagine, have been an even more bigger, robust face-to-face kind of meeting. And the pandemic had those challenges. But from the perspective of the UN network, as you now look back at months of work that you all put in together to make this happen, now sitting back relaxed, what do you look back and see, like what was achieved? What are the big achievements that we can say, good, now we need to accelerate?
Sure. Thank you very much, William. Thank you for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to engage with you and your colleagues. It's always a pleasure to see Fernando. I don't wish to claim that I am a father of the GCM, but I do consider him to be a brother. So I'd like to be the uncle of the GCM in this situation. And congratulations truly on, in this very difficult environment the past few years, bringing together your partners in such a dynamic way. I fully echo everything that Fernando said. You know, the answer to your question again here, I agree with Fernando. I think the IMRF exceeded expectations. I think the last 4 years in many ways have exceeded expectations. If you recall back to the summer of 2018, when the text was adopted by the consultations and then through to Marrakesh, and what a really exaggerated source of political controversy this non-legally binding text generated in certain quarters of the world. If you had predicted then that the Progress Declaration 4 years hence would both be by consensus and genuinely a progress declaration, I think many people may have questioned your sanity. Certainly, I wasn't necessarily predicting that, and so I think looking at where we came from is an important part of it, just as looking at how much more needs to be done. The two are very important. Of course, the Global Compact was born not just out of a recognition that international migration governance needed cooperation and needed a more predictable, rules-based, principled approach. It was also born out of a sense of exaggerated or otherwise crisis in some quarters of the world, and genuine crisis for many migrants who found themselves in desperate or life-threatening or worse situations. So we need to answer your question on two speed plates. There's the institution building side that Fernando referenced, the need to integrate migration in all its dimensions into the UN architecture, and I think we've come a long way there. And then there is the need to ensure that this yields dividends on the ground. And I think there is signs of progress, but there is clearly a lot further to go. And I'll touch on that in my brief comments. I think now we've set up the beginnings of an architecture that can really help accelerate the implementation of the GCM moving forward. I'm talking about, on our side, the development of network structure now at like some 74, 75 country teams and regional offices around the world, firstly. Secondly, we have the collective experience of the first round of regional reviews. As terrible as it may be to think this, we're going to have to very soon, all of us, turn our mind to round 2 of the regional reviews. What lessons can we learn from the first round? What lessons can we learn from the IMRF? How can we make these even more meaningful in the pursuit of our collective goals? Thirdly, we have a progress declaration, which, as I said, I think contains some truly progressive language, including on the link between climate change and its role as a driver of migration, on the need to learn lessons from the pandemic, on the need to expand the type and access to regular pathways, stronger language on the universality of human rights, irrespective, regardless of status, in those critical words, as much more prominent in the Progress Declaration. And I think a lot stronger language than we maybe could have hoped for on the need to combat xenophobia, racism, and discrimination. I think all of that marks progress, so long as we can then develop ways to support states and other partners in moving forward on it. The other elements I would like to point out, which is important to remember that sometimes this arid process does lead to impact, is the development of the Secretary General's report, which was tabled before the General Assembly in February 2022, this year. My God, it seems like a lifetime ago. Was drawn heavily on the inputs of member states and other partners to the first round of regional reviews. It was through the analysis of these inputs that we were able to identify points of convergence and points of divergence or omission. And of course, that led the Secretary General to develop a number of recommendations that really truly formed a platform, not the platform, to the various iterations of the Progress Declaration. It is no surprise that the call to develop operational humanitarian guidelines, for example, is in the Progress Declaration, because this wasn't discussed in the regional reviews. And so the Secretary General played his role in bringing that to the collective attention, and the member states took note of that and said, yes, you're right, this is a point that we need to address. Likewise, on indicators, how do we get better collectively, a shared understanding of how to measure the implementation of the GCM? And now there is a mandate squarely in the Progress Declaration, a consensus document calling on the initiation of that discussion. So I think there's plenty of footholds for all of us moving forward. I echo entirely what Fernando said about the need to strengthen and build on the whole of society approach. Hopefully in another round of interventions, I'll be able to develop that a bit more, but I think I've spoken enough for this round, so I will leave it there, William. Thank you.
No, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for also being very, clear about this in terms of how it was built up, the regional kind of discussions, the Secretary General report, and some of the things that we have moving forward. I particularly like, I know for civil society and many other stakeholders, in fact, the anxiousness about this whole accountability approach kind of thing, and I like that you have pointed out that now the indicators of coming up with some kind of indicators is square in the progress document as well, and there were things that were challenging that needed to move forward. One of the things possibly was how to further develop this multi-stakeholder approach, how to ground it more kind of thing. I think that would be a good second point to look at. I will ask both you, and as I move on to another kind of perspective, and I will ask both of you to think of, the first question was what worked. If you could tell me, if now, as you look back, what are some of the big changes you will think need to be happen in the organizing of the next IMRF? When you have hinted at some of the things, but it would be nice to see if we do it again, what would change and how we would go about it. If you could just think of those two questions, that would be nice. As I move on now to, first I'll go to Ilana. Ilana, I know that the youth came to this with a lot of expectation. I know the youth have put a lot of energy as well. And I know that this is all happening at a time when there are so many challenges in the world. The whole pandemic was one big challenge. And then while we were meeting in New York, the escalation of the war that we had seen in Europe kind of thing was a big thing, and movement of people across borders was big. And as you prepared for it, as young people kind of prepared for this, there was a lot of anticipation in terms of your own contribution, your own space the world that you are responsible for now in building and will inherit, kind of thing. So I know your preparations were along those lines. So as you look back now, and I saw your statement as well that you gave in the club on the last day, kind of thing, which touched the hearts of many, kind of thing, and got us all on a reflection spin as to wow, what she's saying makes a lot of sense. As you found time to breathe since then, and looking back, what are some of the things that you have by way of reflection with the first IMRF? Ilana?
Thanks so much, William. Yeah, and just want to also echo your thanks earlier to the People's Migration Challenge organizers, and specifically to you as well for your unfailing dedication. I don't know where you find all the energy. And also because from our youth delegates, many of us have discussed and felt on reflection as well that the PMC space was one of the most inspiring and meaningful that we attended, and we could feel the energy of the self-organization in the room, and the sense of community and brotherhood and sisterhood. So we really want to thank you for that. And yeah, in terms of the IMRF and reflecting since then, I wish I could say that I have had some time to breathe. I feel like as soon as it ended, there were so many actions and so many opportunities to continue the work, and the question of implementation indicators have really, I think, pushed the work forward. And so not too much breathing room, but we're trying to find some of that as well. And in terms of the expectations, yes, I think the IMRF also came at an interesting point for young people, because as you mentioned, with the pandemic and then the invasion of Ukraine, and now with much of the world facing inflation and rising prices, a lot of the work that we're doing is half engaging youth to be in these spaces and engaging the spaces to be friendly to youth. But another part of the work that we're doing increasingly more now is trying to convince young people and talk to them about the relevance of global processes and global cooperation, because so many young people feel as if there's so many awful tragedies going on, and yet feel that they see little action when it comes to fast mobilization, when it comes to setting aside politics or setting aside national interests in favor of human rights or in favor of saving lives. And so there was a sense of disillusionment that we felt as we tried to engage young people in this process. But there were still indeed many people who were very, very engaged and had high hopes, especially with the GCM significance of the 23 objectives, and it being so prescriptive almost in terms of the guidance that it offered. And so we were really hoping for a lot of the discussions that we did see, which was some true points of many governments standing up and being key champions of migration. I mean, Fernando here is one of the key people in that, I think, and many of us say, without these countries really standing up for the voices of things like detention, like access to services, we would feel much more sad, I think, in the discussions. But I think something that we also noticed too is that it was quite a difficult process for young people to engage in the first place, just because there was so much happening in the world that trying to balance the on-ground work, trying to balance hearing young people's voices and capacity building young people who had stakes in all these issues and ongoing conflicts and displacement, for instance, trying to help them capacity build and access spaces like this, the importance of sharing their voices, plus also keeping up with a very complicated and quite tight deadline process was very stressful and strenuous for us. For example, I was lucky to be in a position of being able to do this, but actually had to give up my full-time job to work on the IMRF for a good 6 months just to try and keep up with it. And I think many of us also found that some of the necessary processes like accreditation was a challenge to guide young people through. The lack of funding that was given in advance was an issue, because we came really close to not actually being able to attend in the first place, since we had received our word of funding less than 3 weeks before the IMRF. So it meant that many of us who were unable to get time off, who were unable to get visas on time, were unable to attend. And so we did have a big expectation for the IMRF, and I think seeing the governments and especially the stakeholders as well come together in support of this common mission, in support of the consensus, that definitely was a point of success we felt for as a point of hope. But we do hope that a lot of the lessons learned from this IMRF as well is taken forward. For example, reflecting on certain, we feel perhaps antiquated practices of engagement or participation. Really interrogating what participation and meaningful representation means, critically thinking about whether now, where we are in 2022, whether the current structures we have for this are adequate, whether it really lends to true self-organization or true capacity building and structured, funded, systematized support for those on the ground, for migrants themselves, for instance, to engage. And I know that one of the things that we were very privileged to benefit from with the support of the UN network and everyone was key involvement as migrant voices, and we felt this was a great great start in terms of engaging young people, engaging migrants, and having a centralized space in the discussions. But the way that we go about, I think, expanding on these stepping stones has to have a level of critical reflection to it, because we definitely felt as well that this even the labeling of a migrant voice or representative separates migrants from the rest of the stakeholders and separates them from the rest of those present, and almost indicates that we're there as a monolith, or we're there in one single capacity, not as a part of the people who actually make decisions. So we hope going forward there'll be a lot of critical reflection, and we really are excited for things like Jonathan mentioned, and the UN network, building these regional networks and national networks, and we think that would be so crucial to pushing implementation along. But we need to keep the momentum up, and we need to make sure that the engagement structures, I think, become a lot more robust, a lot more supported, and a lot more predictable as well. So I'll stop there for now.
Wow, Elena, for somebody who didn't have time to reflect, you said quite a lot. So as well. So, but I really like how you started the call for action, and I can see that at a time like this, when we are seeing what's happening in the world, both in mobility and in so many issues related to mobility, the need for having an action-oriented approach. Of moving things fast from talk to action is becoming more and more urgent for us even to grasp at hope, So I thank you for putting that forward to us. Thank you also for putting forward the challenges of organizing something at a multi-stakeholder level. I don't think we'll ever get that right fully. But the question is, and that you have raised, is how do we go about doing this? And young people were hoping that some of the techniques, some of the processes could be more up to date in terms of organizing with all the tools and skills that we have today in our midst. How could we have been a more effective multi-stakeholder process? Because I can imagine, yes, as young people wanting to have a stake in this, because it's a defining stake for you. So how do we go about organizing such a thing without making it too complicated, without making it too stressful? And I'm very sorry you had to actually give up your job for something like 6 months to do this. But that is the sacrifice we make sometimes, kind of thing, and that is how we pull things together. So thank you for doing that. But yes, a difficult process to engage, and this might be something, again, it would be good if we continue to reflect on this. Like Jonathan said, there's the regional process is going to come up. It seems like it's 2 years away, but it's almost at the doorstep. So we might want to percolate some ideas already on how to move with this. But then let me now move to Helena. And Helena, as somebody who's been so involved in the People's Migration Challenge, and you've been looking at this in your own work and the People's Migration Challenge process, what's really happening on the ground? What's really happening on the ground, kind of thing? And again, the sense of urgency of where rubber hits the road kind of thing, of where policy and discourse within the UN system becomes real in the lives of migrants on the ground kind of thing. You've been key to this process, both in a listening way and in an action way as well through your organization. As you came to the IMRF as well, and as we did the session of the PMC as parallel to the IMRF, looking back now, what are some of your own reflections on this? Helena, somebody needs to unmute. Joe, I think you need to unmute Helena.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I am going to speak in Spanish because I think that's one of the key points that I would like to make today. So please allow me to change into Spanish. If you need interpretation, remember to go to the globe for that. Gracias, William, por esta oportunidad. Yo quisiera compartir que efectivamente desde Alianza Américas le hemos apostado a este proceso porque desde nuestra perspectiva, nuestro trabajo justamente se mide por el impacto concreto que tiene en la vida de las personas migrantes.
Of migrant people's lives. Therefore, we approach both to the Global Compact on Migration as well as the review on international migration, IMRF, the acronym that I will refer to it, with the question and perspective of how can it help us? How can the pact and the FEMI in Spanish, in the acronym, can be a catalyzing element for those changes that we wish to see on the ground. And I think it's interesting then to reflect in terms of what is it or how was it useful and what this parallel event of the People's Migration Challenge meant, particularly the parallel sessions that we held, which I'm not sure in particular, for example, if Fernando or Jonathan were familiar with that part of the process, but it was interesting to be able to have a dialogue.
You have to click on the globe down there, and there you can choose the channel of the interpretation. Sorry. Creo que es importante.
I think it's important to consider that this effort, the effort that we try to create so that we can allow for a dialogue, which was indeed an exchange of mission and dialogue from stakeholders that were on the field in different places, trying to work for the implementation of the Global Compact. And I think that's where the challenge and the biggest obstacle lies, and where we need to ask ourselves how and in which way the Global Compact has indeed been useful and been a catalyzing element for events, even of those that were presented as good practices throughout the regional reviews and also in the work group tables and in the preparatory consultations to the FEMI, to the IMRF. Therefore, how long or how much is needed for that process to actually be like that? And how do we need to conduct a much more critical assessment of what's happening on the field? And I think that part of conversations that are more critical with participation of stakeholders, with non-governmental stakeholders. And also I want to highlight the importance of mayors, the administrations, the local administrations that play an important role in terms of migration policy. There is some rigidity in the UN system that lets them outside. That is a waste for the work that we do. The process, the participation process of civil society does not allow for these self-organizing processes that civil society is very good at creating, that we have plenty of experience on, and that many of us have had a long process working together. Not to allow that type of thing to take place, I think it's harmful to the process, and it's what we've witnessed in the organization, regardless of the civil society, that we haven't seen that have place here in the forum. And I think that those are other aspects that are necessary for us and that are significant for us to consider. I believe also we have been creative in terms of how do we think about global participation. This is a challenging schedule for some time areas of the world, but we have been able to create these spaces, and people are still coming into this discussion as we speak because they wish to understand what's happening, because they need that information, that input. And I think there we identified many challenges in terms of how the UN can create greater interactive participation, for example, the website and the idea of entering the information or the presentations into the website. The website wasn't able to to become dynamic as a space for discussion. I think that was important. The idea that at some point it was announced that it could be a hybrid format, it didn't happen. You watching the sessions through UN Web TV, it's useful, but it's not a process that ensures participation. And I think what we have managed to do in this space with meetings that are much more periodical and ongoing is something that is lost, and that it's worth reflecting on how could there be greater participation and how the global compact isn't just a concern of some few 2 years later, but rather a larger group then of local officials every 4 years in the IRMF. What we need to do is to change that dynamic. And amongst those who participate here, we see government officials participating because they understand that this more live and active participation is useful for them. And I think there's something of the ambience, something of the environment and energy that we have created through this process that it's worth to think and consider how can it be replicated? How can there be something that's happening here that can be taken to the more institutional spaces of the United Nations? And aware of the time, I leave it at that so far. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Helena, for pointing out that it's for us, it's a gamble. And it was a gamble largely because at the end of the day, when something at such a high level is happening, how do you break it down to what's happening on the ground? And to be able to, just like Elena said, to follow what's happening at this high level, you really have to give time. You really have to give time, and then to break it down and things like that. So it is indeed a gamble in terms of making it relevant to actors on the ground who are also stakeholders. So that was a very good point. And that might be worth as a moment of deliberation as well. Thank you as well for pointing out that there is a lot of hope on the ground in looking at the GCM on how it can serve as a catalyzing factor. And I think that is good for us to reflect on as well. And then to say about this multi-stakeholder, the current format. And I know, Jonathan, it's not in your power. I wish it was in your power, or Fernando's for that matter, that the rigidity of the UN's way things have to be done, kind of thing. But if we are not yet in that moment in time where this rigidity becomes a little more flexible, what Helena and what Ilana is saying, how could we think of ways in getting it to be much more multi-stakeholder driven? Now, she gave a very good example there of the mayors, local governments kind of thing, in a certain sense, not being integrated into this process because of the kind of constraints of the system, which is not something that the UN network or the government of Mexico put up, kind of thing. But what are the ways of getting around this? Can we get around this? And can we make it more stakeholder driven, kind of thing, is something for us to deliberate on. And I'll go to you, Jonathan, because I see you're leaning into your laptop now, so go ahead.
No, that's a function of age, William. My eyesight is increasingly messed up, my hearing increasingly deficient. Okay, no, I mean, I listened carefully to what Elena and Elana said, and much of which I agree with, and thank you also, William, for pointing out that the rules of the General Assembly are the rules of the General Assembly. And I think, you know, complaining about them, it may, and I complain about them as well, it may help us let off steam. It's not going to advance the agenda at all. So I think thinking about how we can change that is probably wasted energy, but thinking a bit more obliquely may give us some avenues to explore, because actually in the context of a General Assembly event, this was, and again, I'm not saying this to diminish your concerns, this was a reasonably inclusive one. This was not, I don't think the member states would have seen this as anything other than that. It was also, I think, the first meeting, not the first meeting back, but the first meeting of scale and seniority back after the rules around meetings, the pandemic rules were lifted. And it was a very clear decision by the President of the General Assembly. I think a correct decision, but reasonable people can reasonably disagree, to have it exclusively in person, and that the hybrid would be a one-way hybrid. So it would be the web TV that Elena mentioned. And I think there was a much greater dynamism, a much greater enthusiasm and energy as a consequence of that. But as I say, that is my view. We are going to be, as part of the process of developing the next work plan for the network, so it's not a direct answer to your question, William, be sending out reasonably expansively a questionnaire on how we can, you know, what we should be focusing on and how we can improve our methods of work. Certainly, I think there is probably room to strengthen stakeholder engagement in a number of ways, at the regional level, as I've already mentioned, at the country level as well. Recalling also that this is a two-way door. You will have heard me say on many occasions, William, that if networks in countries, your constituents and partners are not hearing from the network in certain countries where it exists, they should be knocking on the door of that network and saying, why aren't you engaging us? This should be in the DNA of the network at all levels. So it's a two-way process. It would also be useful to get your views on how we can make the Migration Network Hub truly fit for purpose as a discussion space, not monopolistically, but as a discussion space on matters related to GCM, the Progress Declaration, its follow-up and review, to provide platforms for all stakeholders. And I think this sort of leads me to another point, is that, you know, we use the word stakeholder, it's shorthand, but we shouldn't make the mistake of viewing this as a homogenous entity. Of course, if you look at the list of stakeholders, there are radically different interest groups and collectives within that, and whether or not we are providing platforms and spaces for all of these sectors truly to come on board is another sort of question that I would welcome feedback on from any and everyone. And Elena is right. You know, the local authorities fall between the cracks, and this really is a problem. They are neither stakeholders in the context of the GCM, nor within the context of GA rules of procedure are they recognized as government entities. Their access depends upon being part of government delegations or finding other workaround solutions. Whilst, you know, we manage that, and some government delegations included local authorities, this clearly, I think, calls into question our collective commitment or ability to realise the whole of government guiding principle. And again, I think that is something, from my perspective, what we can influence in the network we will be looking at is there room for like dedicated engagement with certain groups of stakeholders who are finding it difficult to maximize their engagement on the GCM. Local authorities would be one, youth maybe another. The list is quite lengthy. And then finally, I think the champions, you know, a number of champions in the IMRF agreed to sort of informally play rapporteur roles on the gender responsiveness and child sensitivity guiding principles. Is there a role for the champions to promote, or individual champions to promote, perhaps on a region by region basis, the whole of society guiding principles, for example? What might that look like in the run up to the regional reviews and more generally? So these would be some of the ideas that I don't know if they're ideas or questions, but I'm asking myself the same questions, and hope we can move this agenda forward. I think it's certainly, speaking on the part of the network, it is a commitment of ours to broaden and deepen stakeholder engagement moving forward.
Thanks for that. And again, as the PMC, which is quite a wide cross-section of stakeholders, are part of the PMC, faith-based organizations, academics, local government and civil society, trade unions have been part of this kind of People's Migration Challenge process. It would be fantastic to see how a dialogue is started off between, and I think one way, Jonathan, of recognizing how to build this kind of multi-stakeholder approach would also be to look at those who are we might wish certain groups to be there, but they might not have capacity or resources or interest, you know. And then there are other groups that are like die hard wanting to be part of this process because they know that it makes a difference or can make a difference on the ground. So these are some of the kind of self-organized groups within civil society, within academia, within faith-based organizations and things like that. I think to be able to identify, map those groups, start working with them, reach out, using them to reach out to others, might be one way to go about this kind of thing. I know, for example, the Action Committee, at least for civil society, has played quite a leadership role in giving information that has been coming out from the UN network for us to then see how to work it on the ground. The PMC has taken a more socializing approach kind of thing for getting different stakeholders. So it will be good to see how these different approaches can be a way of getting much more stakeholder engagement and ownership of the process. But let me come to you then, Fernando. Forget the process, forget the format. As Mexico as champion of human rights issues, both in historically and continuing, particularly on migration, substance-wise, what are the hard issues that you think we did not touch upon or could have touched upon more in terms of maybe these things have to be resolved over the next 4 years? What are some of those issues as Mexico as a government who has played a key role in this, in the human rights discourse around migration? What do you think would be some of those issues?
Thanks, William. I mean, we don't have enough time to discuss all of the issues that are extremely important. However, I think we actually were able to touch on everything. Did we go far enough? Probably not. Many things are difficult depending on the countries that you talk to and in the particular circumstances. But I'm of the view that some of the more difficult conversations that we had were around child detention and immigration detention. Maybe some of the things that we didn't talk about were externalization of borders, and that is probably going to be prominent over the coming years and needs to be in the conversation. I don't think we were able to explicitly say or have a conversation about detention as a deterrent to irregular migration and the very divergent views that exist with regards to that practice. Another major challenge has to do with missing migrants and migrants in transit in situations of vulnerability. It seems like the activity picks up every time we have a negotiation about it. And we talk a lot about saving migrant lives, and very little gets done on the whole at the global level, we've yet to see systematic engagement on the part of the international community on this particular issue. And we know that the mobility trends are slated to rise in the coming years. And the question is not whether there will be migration, but can we make it safe, orderly, and regular? Can we cooperate for that? And the last few years have been a painful reminder that if we don't, the consequences can be fatal. To add, I don't think that we've sufficiently addressed the questions of xenophobia, exclusive nationalisms, and their link to technology and hate speech as it is being played out today. So there's new spaces that are on the horizon, such as the Secretary General's proposal for a global digital compact that will probably look at things like disinformation and human rights online and offline and hate speech, where we need to involve the migration dimension and the diaspora dimensions, because we cannot forget Christchurch, we cannot forget El Paso, we cannot forget Buffalo. Hate speech leads to hate crimes, and migrants are on the receiving end of these hate crimes. We need to do more in that regard. And finally, if I can just chime in on this rigidity conversation, even as a member state, it can be frustrating. But one of the value added of these processes is that it is multi-stakeholder in nature, but member state led. It needs to be member state led, because member states don't take on commitments unless member states are in the driver's seat. That doesn't mean that there can't be meaningful multi-stakeholder engagement, but let's remember that intergovernmental processes exist for a reason, and it's what allows us all together to hold governments to account. But for starters, the session, the multi-stakeholder session that we have in the IMRF for next time around, we should strive to have member state respondents, because there were a lot of important things said in that meeting, but there weren't enough governments in the room listening, because there wasn't a role carved out necessarily for governments. So let's carve out a role so that there can be more interaction and there can be interest there. It all has a solution, and part of the way forward can be turning the whole of society approach into a constant work stream throughout the next 4 years. Thanks.
No, fantastic, and thanks, Fernando, for pointing out. And we are on the same line of thinking around that, of the multi-stakeholder approach. Largely, again, fully understanding that the role of the states in terms of they are the leaders on this. But the question is how to, because there was a certain frustration by the stakeholders on the stakeholder day, when at the peakest, at the height of the program, there were only 9 governments in the room. So we don't want to be talking to ourselves. We want to engage with governments, want a dialogue, we want an interactivity. And I think that is a dimension that needs to be worked on a lot more. And I like the idea, and I think that is also the proposition that we are making, is that let's not focus, and I know Jonathan has said this several times, don't focus on that event alone, but see how you build up to it. And maybe we need to start putting more thinking into that. But let me quickly come back to Ilana then, and you've talked about issues as well, and I know that in the PMC and Fernando just pointed out some of the issues that we could have gone more into depth with. I know for the PMC, we had identified 5 issues kind of thing. And one of the big issues that was in the PMC was more regular pathways and how that could become an anchoring discussion, because at one stage in the PMC, we even called it the keystone objective, objective 5. Within the PMC discussions, this became a key objective kind of thing. And unfortunately, that discussion did not materialize in the way we would have liked to see it materialize, given that this is a discussion happening at the UN. For the youth as well, substance-wise, where do you think we could have done more? What could we have done more in terms of ideas, in terms of action points?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think in terms of the regular pathways, that's definitely one of the key concerns as well for youth. And I think, and another one was also ending child detention, which I think we all in the room know this has been a long battle that's yet to probably be won yet, even though there's progress being made. But I think taking a sort of more macro view on the priorities and levels is that a lot of youth feel that focusing on the specific priorities makes a lot of sense in the practical sense, but a part that we felt should have been and could have been taken more into account is that the priorities and the objectives all play into this interconnected web of achieving safe, orderly, and regular migration. And many youth sometimes feel that the discussions detract from a key concern of youth, which is that all of this ultimately makes up into a future. A future is being built based on these objectives being achieved. And so a lot of the objectives and priorities that play more into the possibility of this future even being built is not as focused upon, because it will usually create more need for commitment or more structural change. And a lot of these are things such as providing basic access to different services like education and employment, even access to labor market, protected labor, and like you said, regular pathways. So many of the young people that we speak to work directly on the ground with youth who are undocumented or have fallen out of regular status. And that's because young people don't know how to navigate a legal system. And many of them are also born from circumstances that they were victim to, whether they were trafficked or they came as part of their families, and the families are being exploited. So many young people out there have their futures immediately taken away from them because there's still not enough recognition of these basic services and these basic needs having to be seen as a basic human right, or having to be seen as this cornerstone for someone to even be able to have a future. So much of the discussions in sustainable development center around how can we have migrants and diaspora, better integrate into society or contribute to the SDGs, contribute to achieving that, contribute to the economy. But this contribution isn't even possible without building these core basic layers of what is needed to be able to contribute in the first place. And so I think in terms of this, the substantive approach, more meaningful conversations, more honest conversations on if we want to achieve this statement that everyone says they're in support of, which is upholding migrants and diaspora to be leaders in society, to be able to participate in decisions, to be able to contribute, to be able to be part of the building blocks of a society, which many of them already are, just in a hidden or exploited way. Then there must be these basic services and provisions and changes in mindset that we have to address and really take action on. So yeah.
Thank you. I like how you say that access to services is the building blocks for migrants and their communities in terms of better integrating in society and contributing to the growth and development of society. I think that's true. We think of access to service largely as kind of projects kind of thing, and then there is a cap put on it somewhere kind of thing because of resources and things like that. I think access to services, how do you universalize access kind of thing, is something that we don't talk about enough within migration discourse. And very often when we do, it's a very projectized kind of perspective. So thank you for pointing that out, because that is in a certain sense the building blocks of the future. Thank you. Helena? substantively issues that we need to definitely talk about. If we were supposed to, in the next 4 years, put it squarely on the table, what did we like, what could we do better?
Bueno, yo continúo en español.
Well, I'll stay in English. In Spanish.
Not being adequately addressed within the IMRF, and that's why I'm trying to do this. Continúo en español y lo hago porque creo que
I'll
los
continue in Spanish because I think there are elements of language justice that have not been resolved adequately in the IMRF context. And this is the first point that is very important to generate a substantive participation in all the aspects. I believe, William, that the question is very difficult to answer, but I thank Fernando for placing this on the table, these issues that I agree with him that are fundamental. Some of the discussions that we've talked about, and this idea, this is a very provocative question to understand the document as a live document that still has possibilities to continue being improved and developed, because while it does have some points that are very attractive, in which the final proposal of the compact defines a pathway to work and to define, in some cases the compact was really left behind, even behind the standards of human rights. Like the migratory detention is a key point, and more so and more serious, in especially the detention of children. But in general terms, people have been left without been placed away. It's an essential problem, which is also linked with the other point that Fernando pointed out that I think is a key point. How is this used as a dissuasive issue, like a punishment of migration? The absence of due process, even criminal defense, legal defense, are important elements that have to be added to the discussion. I think this is left out, and accepting that the compact is just left as is and other alternatives, more step by step, are not effective. Here we need a stronger transformation. And I think another central point is externalization of migratory control, which is an issue that's also left outside of the compact. And to keep the relevance of the compact itself, we have to ask ourselves how that can be integrated. In regarding life-saving issues, this is an important element. It's not enough to that in that particular moment it hurts us, let's say, in worries, in recognizing the terrible numbers of people who die drowned or in the desert, the great risks to life and integrity to which people need to face as an only pathway, because there are no regular pathways. In that sense, we also have to think how to generate a different process. And there's a fourth issue that I'd like to refer to, which is the issue of labor rights, the centrality of work in many of the migration projects of people. And here I see you, William, with your frame that reference the wage theft. And that issue, the protection of labor rights, the rights of association against wage theft, safety in the workplace, are still fundamental elements in which the compact still needs to work on. So it's difficult to make a list in itself, because in every aspect there is work to be done. And for that reason, I think it's worth mentioning to think in this dialogue, how can we invite and include in a more effective way the UN agency, the network, and the agency that play a fundamental role in the implementation. And that is why I find interesting to try to think if the agenda as is turns out to be effective, if this grouping of the objectives with these 4 or 5 groups in which it exists moves us to the type of conversations that we want to have or not. migration for climate change at the beginning of the session. We pointed out as an important issue, something that appears in the resolution. But the question remains, how is that reflected in concrete actions? And I think that in a process, like Fernando mentioned, led by the states, a governmental process. And here I think that from civil society, we're not lost. We understand what a role is. If we have to think how the agenda is revised and the methodologies so that the IMRF, it becomes an exchange space, a dialogue space. On the other hand, it runs the risk of becoming a mechanistic process without any sense. Some others mentioned it already, but I want to point out that without the participation of non-governmental actors, is concentrated in only one day, and that's a day in which the state actors is not interesting for further participation, we end up with nothing. We have to think of a different exchange agenda, maybe objective by objective, to generate the pressure to the states for them to prepare themselves to be ready to state what they have been doing for each of the 23 objectives, not with 2 or 3 elements to show, but with a more integral reflection, more whole reflection. That would be important. I understand the mechanisms in the UN, but I think that the interventions as they have been thought end up being soliloquies in which the session ends and the question is what remains of this day in which we heard one intervention after the other. And then I'm talking about fundamental problems in which the spaces that have been assigned to civil society were not respected and the agenda wrapped up and those interventions were not able to be heard. So I think with the objective is not just talking for talking. It's not the photo op, but the exchange opportunity that ends up with transformative effects of the better implementation of the compact. And how the agenda is completely revised to generate constructive processes which are dynamic and participative with more participation. Thank you.
Thank you again. And thank you for giving us the model of what could be the next IMRF in terms of the agenda, how the agenda could be set, and also how interactivity can happen more. And this is just a thought to think about as I open now the floor for other people for 2-minute interventions. But there's some good points that came out here, Jonathan, Fernando, for us to kind of reflect on together is how to keep this process going so it doesn't become event oriented. Peter Sutherland had one time in the GFMD talked about mini multilateralisms. And this might be something to look at. Can the UN network anchor mini multilateralisms on issues, on topics that, so they don't all get focused around one time in one moment in time at an IMRF, but are processes happening throughout the 4 years kind of thing. There are these conversations happening, moving the agenda from talk to policy to action kind of thing. This might be something to worth looking at in design, largely because today we have those tools to make these things happen along those lines, both technology-wise as well as human resource-wise. So it would be good. And thank you for pointing out some of those issues. It would be fantastic if externalization of borders, if there is any discourse that fits within the UN system squarely, that would be one of the issues definitely that would be on the top. But thank you for that. And now let me open up the floor. If anybody else wants to now make a 2-minute intervention, question, comment, reaction, whatever, no violent reactions, but we are in a negotiating mode here. So go ahead. I see hands going up. I'll call them as I saw them come up. Michelle Leroy, and then Samuel, and then Vladimir. Let's go. Michelle, 2-minute interventions.
Thanks so much to all of you. I was wondering in the coming 4 years, because that's kind of what we have as the time, where do you think the spaces are to address the issues that Fernando has first listed, which are exactly the ones: child detention, racism, xenophobia, externalization of borders. Nazak Ramadan also just put in the chat, internalization of borders, which is all the immigration enforcement and the data sharing of undocumented migrants with health professionals and in the education authority. So where do you think the spaces are to then unpack these? Because these were the divisive issues. And I do think it's probably useful that they can't be buried in the sand in a sense. So, I mean, these were the ones that caused the member states to still give declarations at 5 p.m. on the last day, saying that they're still against detention of children, even though the global standards say you can't be against it because it's international human rights law to not detain children. So, I mean, I just give that as one example. So is it the Migration Network working groups? Is it the GFMD? Is it what William is also suggesting, these other spaces? So that's one question. And then I think the issue of local government, you've all raised it in a sense. And it's not actually kind of a choice to not do outreach to them. Basically, to achieve the GCM, they can't be ignored, because most of the things that are the most progressive in the GCM, in the Global Compact, concern undocumented migrants' human rights. And most of them, in a sense, are being implemented by local authorities first before national level governments. So they have to be brought on board, because they have to show how it's possible in many countries how to do this. And not to say that the role of national level governments remains a key role, obviously, as Fernando was saying, but they can't be ignored. So how to get around this, basically, how to do this in the spaces and how to get around it. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We move to Samuel. Samuel, you have 2 minutes. Samuel?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you've lost
Hello.
20 seconds.
Okay, so it's on the issue of participation, as Elena mentioned in her first conversation, and I think you also, concerning how civil society can participate in person in such programs that are relevant to our works on the ground. And I think even though the IMRF achieved a lot this year, and it is good we carry on with progress, let's also not lose facts that civil society participation in those in person is very important. And the issue of visa acquisition this time around wasn't too smooth for some of us, and at the end we couldn't participate in person. So I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Clara Scopian, who was so much in respondence to our emails. She did so well, but I think the UN Network on Migration could improve much to make sure some of us participate, and I think we should work on that going forward. The approval letter alone is not enough when you have an embassy in your country that is not taking visa applications for the next 4 or 5 years. It's not, you cannot say approval letter is enough in such cases. So if we really want civil society to participate, let's take a step further to ensure our participation.
Thank you,
Thank
Samuel.
you very much.
Thank you, Samuel, for that. And Vladimir.
Hola, saludos. Tu gusto.
Hello, greetings. It's a great pleasure to see you all once again. I add myself to what Samuel has pointed out, and also what has been pointed out regarding priorities. And I would like to add one more. Dear Jonathan, I don't know if it's possible. What happens to education of the children of migrants? The education, our children are usually falling to a second place and remaining in the countries that were left, in the countries that we're at, in two societies, one that is going on and the second that is relegated. And yes, something on what Elena and everyone else has pointed out, the great question is how to create spaces of encounter with the governments. Like in these spaces that we've been doing in New York, like the governments were like running away, running from civil society without wanting to dialogue, without wanting to listen to us. And the same thing when we've been participating in plenaries, I am sorry, it was a deaf dialogue. How do we create spaces, smaller spaces perhaps in the IMRF, in which we might dialogue with the governments and that they might hear us, and also hearing them, to look for spaces in which policies that move for in favor of migration might be concreted. I would only like to point out a great challenge from here on in the next 4 years, how we're going to do regional encounter meetings so that when the IMRF takes place is an encountering and dialogue space, because sometimes you talk for 1-2 minutes and no one's listening to you because what that doesn't translate into policies or reflection. There's no answer, or at least someone saying, hey, we've heard, we're worried because of the disappeared people. For example, we have great worries. We've seen the Melilla thing. There's been a murdering of migrants. And from these spaces, that should be more reflection and also condemnation of these, as from the Asian Forum, the wage theft. We also mentioned the murdering that's happening in the borders, and the governments are really not doing anything about it. So I'll just leave that there. How to create encountering spaces of dialogue so that in the governments will not be afraid of sitting down with civil society.
Thanks, Vladimir. The thirst for dialogue, for meaningful dialogue, for transformation. Thank you for putting it so nicely. Paddy. Go ahead, Paddy.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, some weak internet connection, but I hope you could hear me. Afternoon, and it's a delight to be here. Simply because I think New York was overwhelming in different ways. It was a great opportunity to meet different people. It was a great opportunity, particularly from the civil society space. But I think much more, like we have talked about, I think in the space of interaction, so much in the formal debate, as one would say, but much more in the sidelines and in the corridors. And often I think, how do we move that conversation from the corridors into the main plenary? When are we going to move away from side deals and arrangements in corridors and really brave enough to have these kind of conversations? So I think I'm really with you and with most of the panelists who've talked about the low representation, but the low engagement that came from government side. And just echoing again from, African representation, but also Asian representation. I think we can be very clear about that in terms of just the logistics. And I think one wouldn't want to spend this very valuable time in talking about logistics because we are in the 21st century where we can plan things at the click of fingers. So we should be able to get people across to meetings if we really are very intentional. So I think we have a list we can look forward to. And I'm hoping we don't need to wait 4 years for most of the things that we've talked about here. Just echoing again, I think what Michelle has really asked in terms of spaces and opportunities. And that was my question. And I felt like answering myself at the same time and saying, how are we using immediate crisis at our doorsteps in different places? Colleagues are writing about the situation in Morocco. There are many other situations around the world that we could call upon. And we can say then, where do we see the progress declaration really coming into place? It's just been a few months. It's not even, it's still hot off the press. Others haven't even managed to digest it, I think, in government in terms of reading it and really localizing it. So how do we localize that progress declaration? How do we make some of those statements that government were very bold to make and bring back those conversations back home through regional organizations, through national platforms, where we're talking about policy and dialogue around national migration issues, but also regional migration issues, but also thematic things like racism and discrimination, whose mention in the progress declaration is but a scratch to what we see. And as long as we don't tackle these things, I think it will be disappointing to go back to the next IMRF and to be talking about the same things, alternative to detention, racism, and many other things, for instance, that trade unions have also brought about in terms of things that affect migrants, but things that are also affecting their families in many different ways. So I just thought, to chime in those reactions and also just to thank the panelists for really sharing from their perspectives, because I think as we go forward, it's important to have this balanced narrative. It was not a success as it is. I think it's important to note that so we can, pick up on that to-do list on the things we have to do. And that goes from the individual level all the way to international organizations, as well as the Human Migration Network, which is great that you're here with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Patty, and for pointing out always that there is so much more that could be done so easily. Thank you. I saw Richard's hand up, but it seems to have disappeared. I see Collins, and I see no other hand going up. So after Colin, I will go back to the participant, to Jonathan and Elena and Helena. Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to relinquish to Richard if he wants to jump in. Richard.
He's not in the room. I don't see.
Oh, okay. Maybe drop that. Yeah, thanks. First of all, I want to say that my points and whatever I'm coming from is extremely biased. So I just want to put that disclaimer out on the offset. So take that with that kind of frame in mind. And biased because I feel that we have been engaging in a position of a very purposeful way with a lot of strong goals and really high expectations throughout the IMRF. Throughout the GCM process of implementation even, and right from the kickstart when the GCM was even being negotiated. So I think that kind of biases kind of lends itself to both good outcomes and outcomes that we want to see address and shifted and evolve along the way. And in that, I think one of the experiences we have is that full kind of appreciation to Fernando and his mission in particular in kind of the leadership that you've played, Fernando, and in your mission's leadership in this process right from the get-go and throughout all of this. And also not just your leadership within that process within states and in a multilateral process, but also engaging civil society. And that's been really good. We've enjoyed that in other processes, and we've enjoyed it for the IMRF throughout the Progress Declaration negotiations, and having that possibility to discuss with you, as well as the leadership you've played with the Friends of Migration group, among other missions in New York. Our worry, though, is that that's not shared more widely with other member states. Even some of the champion countries, engaging with them and talking to them has been a challenge, and discussing that. And I'm worried, given again, kind of reiterating what some have discussed, the positions taken after the Progress Declaration was adopted by member states, kind of stating clarifying their positions around the Progress Declaration, kind of reflecting on that. I'm worried that we're not able to move forward in that, and both sort of taking a more excited, more enthusiastic view about the GCM and implementing that going forward, but also engagement in general with all stakeholders. And I'm worried that it's often viewed by increasingly more and more member states that civil society in particular, but also other stakeholders, but for civil society's engagement in these kinds of processes within the UN framework is often taken in an antagonistic way at worst, and at best taken in a way that needs to be managed. And with such good precedent in this, both in our migration work, but also in other processes, that's not true. That when civil society is fully engaged, we actually have the opportunity, and I'm sure Mexico, you've seen this as well, that we push the agenda so much that it allows like-minded states to have that opportunity to also push that agenda multilaterally. And I think this strategy could work so well if there was better engagement and more openness towards it. I'm worried that we're seeing a trend with a lot of member states that's kind of in a reversal of what has come in the past, that we're seeing a drawback, seeing more restrictions placed around stakeholders. So I wonder if you share that same concerns among member states within the UN too, Jonathan, but especially among member states, if you share that same concerns, and where we can find the opportunities to advance that. Hopefully the regional processes will provide some of those opportunities, but going back to the global, and let's never forget that a lot of processes flourish and also die within member states' moods at the global level. We've seen that happen in history so often. So how can we make sure that it flourishes within the GCM going forward, especially at the global level, and including civil society and other stakeholders' engagement?
Thanks, Colin. Richard, I see your hand is up. You're back in the room very quickly because we are running out of time. Richard?
Yes.
Perfect.
Are you getting?
Perfect, perfect.
Thank you, William. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, my battery is a little bit disturbing. Just two quick things. William, I'm afraid we might not actually achieve we might not even achieve significant percentage of the whole global compact for migration. And for me, I would advise, especially the core organizers and then the key partners in this, can we start pitching projects, whether at the various continents, so that we try to get the dividends of all these. Otherwise, it will just be the usual thing. And you will agree with me, we are not even going to achieve the sustainable development goal because there is no clear partnership between government and the citizens. So in order for us not to take that path, let's try to go practical. And out of all these 24 objectives, can we map, like the way they were categorized, can we try to pitch some of these into real project terms at the various continental levels, whether in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, and we try to get some of the impact. And then maybe the last one, Elena has also alluded to that. The problem is government. For instance, my government in Uganda, I don't think they're actually in position to even lead any meaningful process in this, because there are so many things that are happening in Uganda. And I remember telling you during one of the lectures that during the course that we were doing, Uganda is so strategic in the region, whether you're to look at it from the EAC, the East African Community, or the Great Lakes region, or the International Conference for the Great Lakes. And then looking at it also now going down to ECOWAS and other regional economic communities of the African Union. And until we try to projectize and then try to actually take it to government and hold them accountable, nothing much will be done. Even at the level of intergovernmental bodies, look at the AU to just come out and write a statement. I mean, just post a statement. By now, there should actually be even a fact-finding mission sent to Morocco, where more than 200 people have been massacred. It shouldn't just stop at the level of issuing statements by the African Union Commission. And for me, just a quick one. And then for me, I would even say maybe sanctions should be actually placed on Mali. I mean, sorry, on Morocco and Spain, for that matter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Richard. Let's now move. Let's move back now to Helena, Ileana, and then Jonathan. So I'll start with Helena first.
Well, I would like to thank everyone for many of the questions that have been posed here at the forum. I think indeed let's call it, the doubts and questions lie around how can we organize better and how can we achieve meaningful progress in the upcoming period. I believe, as Colin was saying in his intervention, each of us is talking very personally in terms of our own experience in the forum, what it meant to participate at the IMRF, what is left to us from this process, and how can this inform and define whether we wish to continue linked with the process or not. I believe I would like to conclude by highlighting that it's where we start. We start from the acknowledgement that it's exceptional, that despite the pandemic, a process that began before the pandemic could have achieved to hold active participation from civil society. I wanted to highlight that there were many people who could not travel, and they could not do it because they received the confirmation for their participation to have been admitted too late, or because they did not receive the information on time about receiving economic support. And also there was fundamental problem with visas. There were colleagues who could not partake. And these are all elements that the system of the United Nations should be able to work out better. We know about representatives of government delegations who, because of the same issues around visas, could not travel. So there are some knots in the process that need to change and must change. And I think the question and the essential issue that we all need to approach is how do we make progress in terms of the indicators or in terms of indicators? How do we create indicators that are centered around those principles established by the Global Compact, including gender perspective or sensitivity towards childhood, concern around human rights, and how do we ensue the process now? If we leave this process aside and work on the implementation in 3 years, we will not have concrete outcomes. And I think this is a core element. Now, I would just like to conclude by going back precisely to the intervention by Colin Raja during FEMI, during the IMRF. He there was discussing the need for us to rescue that encouragement and that interest in participating in the process, a process that we need in order to create spaces for meaningful dialogue and interaction. I wanted to underline the point made by Mrs. Pascual. In many contexts for civil society, the pandemic and authoritarian governments had closed or spaces for participation. There was a key opportunity in New York. And when we were hindered even to move in the United Nations facilities, then the process became frustrating, certainly. So therefore, there are many logistical and practical corrections that are fundamental that need to be made. And this cannot be left at the end of the process. These are not minor points, are core points. I think the challenge is how can we rebuild the process? Not to feel completely satisfied with what's there already. We may run the risk to make this an bureaucratic space without transcendence. It depends on all of us to get all the regional consultations and the IMRF to become spaces to dynamize these transformative processes. I think what we listen here from civil society is the willingness to contribute to that process, to progress. And what we have witnessed, particularly in this People's Migration Challenge, is the willingness to uphold that energy, those dynamizing processes in order to move forward and to come with proposals to the regional consultation processes. That is absolutely fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for raising those points, Helena. Very well put. Ilana.
Thanks so much, William. And yeah, I definitely agree wholeheartedly with everything Helena just said, especially with some of the amazing points that people are making in the chat as well about how we can redesign almost the process or at least adapt some aspects of it, perhaps the ones that can be adapted or changed to make it more about accountability and cooperation and working together, action oriented rather than just a space to talk to rather than talk with. And actually, just so I don't duplicate that, but add on perhaps a few thoughts from some of the things that Jonathan said as well about the network that the UN network are building and facilitating the need for a whole government approach, whole society approach. Perhaps there could also be an opportunity to shift the continued focus and momentum of the GCM now into one that is more action oriented. So perhaps the network could be there not just as a collection of people there to exchange with the UN agencies and with the UN network themselves, but with each other. And this could be a platform, some kind of cooperation mechanism or facilitated cooperation for this whole society approach in actually creating an accountability and true action plan within the nations, within the regions, because clearly a lot of us here want to work together. It's just that we don't know who to talk to or we don't have the structure for it. And so I'll leave it at that, hopefully action-oriented, hopeful point. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Helena. And now for you, Jonathan, you must be feeling like Atlas holding up the skies kind of position. But definitely, I mean, you've heard very passionate voices of wanting to engage, wanting to participate, wanting to link up and collaborate. And I think this is the beauty of the entire GCM process. How can we build on this? So, and over the next 4 years, and you yourself have said, not to treat it as events, you pointed out national level collaboration, regional and things like that. But I give you the last word to reinforce some of that thinking and moving forward.
Oh, great. Thank you, William. And really, thank you again for convening this meeting. I think it is nicely timed. In fact, as you said at the outset, where everyone's had a chance to reflect a little on what went right, what could be improved upon, and before. I hope many of us will take a deserved northern summer break. I think the first thing I would say is, you know, several of us, myself included, have used the word success or lack of success in this meeting. And I think it's important not that we necessarily have a shared understanding of what success looks like, but that for each of us, we define what we mean by success. What is our respective metrics for success for the first IMRF that just went by in May? Yeah, and success, I think, has a number of components. It's obviously what is your objective, it's who the actors are who can help achieve that objective, and it's the timelines within which that objective can be achieved. And certainly when I apply those, I certainly do believe the first IMRF was a success. It was a success in bringing together the states. It was a success in having a consensus document. I am not particularly surprised by the explanations of position. There were relatively few. They came from relatively predictable quarters. And the more significant aspect to my mind was that there was no call for a vote, that they accepted the overall document and they needed to provide a degree of caveats around it. I mean, that's part of an answer to Paddy's question in the margins. But, you know, I could sum this all up by saying that what I think we are engaging on is a process. It's a process of institution building. It's a process of familiarizing ourselves and our partners, including maybe particularly in government, with what the Global Compact on migration is and is not. And that's made immensely easier by the fact that this is a living document. Again, going back to an earlier intervention, I think one of the, if not the most important element of the GCM for me, in any event, this is a personal observation, is its follow-up and review chapter, the chapter that ensured that this document wouldn't just gather dust on a shelf, because every 2 years at the regional level and then at the global level, there would be a system of focused attention to it. But the flip side of that, and I think this is equally important, is it's not the only document that is relevant on migration. You know, our entire human rights framework, international law framework, international labor framework, and so on and so forth, are just as relevant. And this, I think, is an area that we need to strengthen moving forward, is that we don't just talk about GCM and migration in GCM and migration fora, that there are a large number of other platforms provided by the UN and other mechanisms in which we can discuss different aspects of the agenda that is raised in the GCM. But when it comes to the GCM itself, strictly speaking, and the network, I think some of these platforms, come back to Michelle's point, are the champions. There are different levels of intensity within that community, but they are showing, I think, signs of potential and wanting to play a role. Within the regional and country networks, very much. I mentioned the hub. We haven't discussed the pledges today, which I think have yielded some quite interesting commitments. How can we support the realization of those commitments. We've talked here rightly about wanting to have concrete advancement of agendas. Well, here's one area where we can explore. And looking ahead to the regional reviews, as I mentioned. So I think it is very important that we develop a sort of interlinking lattice work, both within the context of the GCM and in other fora, in which we bring together actors, whether it is by type of stakeholder or region of states and stakeholders or issue of thematic concern, and that this is a relatively ongoing, continuous process. We could, for example, have pretty dynamic sets of conversations on the humanitarian guidelines, on the indicators, as I mentioned, so that by the time this lands in the General Assembly 2 years from now, it is something that everyone has participated in the development of, that it is a really ongoing, inclusive process. So I'm actually quite excited about the opportunities that are out there, none of which means to say I am blind to the many and very serious challenges that remain. And, you know, I know that the network, its executive committee, as we develop the work plan moving forward, will place a premium on how we can strengthen our engagement with you all in the next chunk of time. But I think it's from a good foundation.
That's very, very helpful. That the network will put premium amount of time in looking at how to engage with the different stakeholders. And I think that is key to the success of the implementation of GCM. Over the last 4 years, there was a lot of anticipation. The pandemic did not kill that anticipation. The fact that we still came together and that we still were able to get some forward-looking agenda is a good sign. Some of the challenges that have been raised in this are definitely worth looking at, because there is a sense on the ground of wanting to be part of this conversation, contribute to that conversation, and more especially turn that conversation into an action. And that is what we are all, and that is what will be, that is what history will look at, of how the pandemic, or if there was a moment of history coming to a standstill, mobility coming to the standstill, the first IMRF took the first steps in a forward-looking agenda that transformed migration governance to a whole different level kind of thing. And this is where we want to walk with you just as much as we feel you want to walk with us. And I think that's the future of success. So thank you very much for everybody who has been part of this. It's in our last PMC organizers call, we had a call to commitment for our organizations as organizers to take this forward, and we will continue to take this forward. Jonathan, as the representative of the UN network, would be fantastic. I know this is your second or third appearance with us. You know, you can become our poster child kind of thing if you want by coming on more often. But it would be great to have these conversations with you. It gives a sense of how the ground is thinking, what the ground is feeling. But this is where we might look at things differently, but in dialogues like this, we can see how to forge a pathway forward. So thank you all. Thank you all for being part of this. Elena, Helena, Fernando, who has left because of an urgent meeting, and Jonathan. And thank you everybody else among the co-organizers and the people in the room. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.